They were called America's first dynasty of shadows, and yet you've never heard of them. But that's not an accident. A sealed court document from 1863 mentioned them only once, in a warning. The Winthrops must never be named in the public record again, it read. Buried beneath layers of land deals, military appointments, and ecclesiastical power, the Winthrop family carved a silent empire, not with armies but with whispers. You didn't see them in newspapers. They were the ones who owned the newspapers. Picture this. A boy of 10 wakes up screaming in a Boston mansion in 1821. He claims he saw his grandfather's face inside a mirror, but backwards, speaking in a voice not his own. The servants are told to keep quiet. A priest is called, but no one ever speaks of it again. That boy would later become Senator Aldous Winthrop, author of several legislative acts that changed how mental illness was treated across the country. But you won't find his name tied to those policies directly. Only initials, only aliases. The Winthrops never signed history. They branded it. And what you're about to hear was never supposed to be unearthed. These are not stories. They are warning signs. Portals into the architecture of control. Symbols cloaked as scripture, charities masking dark rituals, generational wealth rooted not in industry, but in ideology. This is not conspiracy. This is a design that begins, like all great systems of control, with a blood oath taken in 1773 in a church basement beneath New Haven, an oath signed by 3 men, 1 priest, 1 banker, and 1 child. That child was Silas Winthrop, age 11, and he was never seen in daylight again. What followed was a lineage of whispers, a dynasty of silence. The Winthrops infiltrated Ivy League boards, the publishing houses, even early psychiatric institutions, always behind the veil, always as donors, never as directors. Always above scrutiny because they operated beneath it. You were taught to fear tyrants, dictators, and mad kings, but what if the true architects of your cage never raised their voice at all? Welcome to the story of the Winthrops, a story that begins where your comfort ends. Take a breath. It might be your last in the world you thought you knew. Silas Winthrop was just a boy, but not in the way we define childhood. At age 11, he stood in a circle of 12 robed men beneath a crumbling church outside New Haven. Each man represented a force: finance, religion, law, medicine, education, agriculture, media, energy, war, politics, trade, and silence. They each held a black candle. One by one they blew out the flames. Only silence remained. Then they turned to the boy. A parchment was brought forward, thin, animal skin vellum, rumored to be inscribed with ink made from crushed bone and red wine. Silas was told he would never marry, never father children, never speak his full name aloud. Instead, he would be a vessel, a keeper of a hidden doctrine passed down through the narrow line. He signed, not with his name, but with a drop of blood pressed into a sigil etched in iron. At that moment, Silas Winthrop died as a child and was reborn as an instrument. From that day forward, he was escorted everywhere by men who never introduced themselves. He was educated not in schools but in catacombs. He memorized entire volumes of ancient political strategies, learned the mechanics of influence, the art of invisible war. Not a soldier, not a scholar, a shadow, trained not to conquer, but to orchestrate those who did. By 1792, Silas had already established the New Pilgrimage, a discreet consortium of landowners and judges who met in total secrecy beneath decommissioned colonial forts. They exchanged no paperwork, only gestures, only artifacts. Each member had a single role: to position pawns on the public board, mayors, sheriffs, editors, priests, so the game always looked fair. But the outcome was fixed, and here's where it gets darker. In 1805, 3 major fires destroyed government archives across New England. Nothing was saved. But a single locked chest was reportedly pulled from the ashes. Its brass nameplate read only, "Property of W." No one ever saw the contents, but afterward 13 new churches were founded, each on land that previously held native burial grounds, each funded by anonymous donors, each with identical blueprints despite being in different towns. Coincidence? or the execution of a plan spanning generations. The Winthrops weren't building wealth, they were building a system, one where belief, power, and obedience flowed through hidden channels like veins beneath the skin of a nation, and we've been breathing their designs ever since. Are you ready to go deeper? Because the descent is only beginning. In 1817, a curious thing happened in Charleston. A young pastor named Elias Merriweather gave a sermon that electrified the town. He spoke of a divine architecture, a hidden order woven into society. God, he claimed, does not govern from above, but from within the walls of your institutions. The congregation gasped. He wasn't preaching scripture, he was decoding blueprints. The next day, Pastor Merriweather vanished. His house was emptied, church records erased, his wife institutionalized for spiritual hysteria, but a single page survived, hidden behind the altar, wedged between bricks, found decades later during renovations. It read, Winthrop, the hand that signs without ink, the eye that sees from the ceiling corner. They are not in power, they are beneath it, like roots, wool, big rot. That was the first time the name had ever been found outside the family's direct estate. And yet if you track every shift in early American power, the sudden transfer of land deeds in Connecticut, the ghost towns near former mills, the rise of obscure banks tied to no charter, you'll find a presence, unnamed, unseen, but precise, strategic, patterned. In 1824, the Boston Reformatory for the Morally Deficient opened its gates. It was framed as a school for troubled boys, but no official census was ever kept, no press was allowed inside. And the curriculum, it was based on the Silent Doctrine, a Winthrop-authored manuscript never published publicly. Its teachings included obedience without justification, the erosion of identity to create pliability, the power of self-surveillance through guilt. These were not lessons for criminals. These were installations of software into the minds of future bureaucrats, judges, clerks, and educators. Men who would carry these instructions like viruses, unaware they were infected. And over the next decade, those boys were placed quietly and efficiently into the veins of the American machine. One of them became the architect of the first standardized school curriculum. Another drafted legislation for mental health asylums. A third designed the New York courthouse. Each touched the lives of thousands. But none bore the Winthrop name. They didn't need to. Because when the mind is trained to police itself, when the citizen becomes his own warden, the puppet master can vanish into silence. And that silence was authored by the Winthrops, ready for what comes next. Because now we cross into their greatest experiment. The Hudson River froze earlier than ever recorded, and at its edge, in a grey-stoned compound hidden by pines, a gathering took place that would shape the very nervous system of America's future institutions. It was called the Veiled Convocation. 13 men entered, only 9 left, the others never mentioned. Again, not even by their families. What's crucial isn't who they were, but what they became. Each of the survivors left with an identical object, a brass key with no known lock, engraved with a symbol historians still can't decode. But one scholar described it as a compass bent in on itself, pointing inward instead of out. Each of those men was seeded into a different region of power, one into a national bank, one into a newspaper syndicate, another into a university's board of trustees. The fourth? He restructured the very architecture of the federal postal system, but they weren't there to manage. They were there to install, not programs, not laws, patterns, subtle ones, like bureaucratic delays that kill reform, like school policies that reward silence over creativity, like invisible algorithms of failure engineered to feel like personal weakness rather than systematic intent. These were psychological infrastructures. They knew the truth, that to control a society long-term, you don't need violence. You need rhythm, repetition, a drumbeat of frustration, a loop that trains a population to shrink itself. And here's where it gets surgical. Each man of the convocation carried a version of what was called the Winthrop lattice, a chart with no numbers, only names, placed within concentric circles. Those closer to the center weren't necessarily more powerful, but more entangled. These weren't family trees. They were systems of influence. Think. Who married whom? Who financed whom? Who ruined whom? At the lattice's core, a symbol, not a name, a mirror. Because the ultimate truth the Winthrops operated on was this: power is not what you hold over others. True power is when they see your reflection in their own decisions and mistake it for free will. So now ask yourself, how many of your choices were truly your own? Or have you just been dancing to a rhythm laid down 200 years ago? And now, we go deeper. Because the Winthrops didn't just shape institutions, they rewrote the architecture of belief itself. Belief is the final frontier, not what a man thinks, but what he won't question. By 1842, the Winthrops had mastered institutions, policies, and social rhythm. But control through structure alone is fragile. Bricks can be broken, papers can be burned, so they turned to the one fortress immune to fire and blade: faith, not religion. That would be too obvious. What the Winthrops engineered was more elegant, more parasitic. They inserted symbols, not across churches, but across daily life. It began with architecture. Schools across the Northeast began installing identical clock towers, all showing the same time, 7:14. It was never explained, but in Winthrop doctrine that number meant order through disorientation, the moment before waking, when dreams still feel real. Then came the literature. Between 1843 and 1851, a surge of children's books flooded the American market, each with different authors but uncannily similar messages. Be still, stay quiet. Obedience is safety. The world is too complex for your little mind. They weren't bedtime stories. They were blueprints for internal cages. One title, The Gentle Nest, was funded anonymously and distributed for free across thousands of schools. Its main character, a curious bird who dies the moment it questions why the nest has walls. That book shaped a generation of teachers. Those teachers shaped generations of citizens. And just as planned, the question was no longer who is in power. It was why would you even ask? But the Winthrops didn't stop there. In 1847, an obscure chapel in Vermont held a closed-door summit of 5 high-ranking clergy, a philosopher, and a physician. Days later, a new sermon format swept Protestant churches: shorter messages, gentler tone, passive God. The wrathful voice was replaced with one of bureaucratic calm, and just like that, judgment disappeared from the pulpit. Only compliance remained. Because when faith becomes soft and vague, it no longer drives rebellion. It pacifies. The Winthrops knew the most dangerous thing a man can possess is clarity. Clarity leads to questions. Questions lead to defiance. So they buried clarity in comfort, wrapped it in sentiment, lulled you with a warm voice saying, "There's no need to dig, all is well." But listen closely. That voice isn't your own, and it never was. The descent continues. Next, we expose their darkest branch, the Winthrop Institute for Moral Correction. A remote facility was established 11 miles outside Albany. No signage, no road markers, just a series of dirt paths that vanished into forest. The locals called it the Box. Its real name? The Winthrop Institute for Moral Correction. On paper, it never existed. No census records, no funding trail, no tax documents. And yet, shipments of medical supplies, school desks, typewriters, and ink deliveries flowed in monthly, all paid in cash, delivered at night. Witnesses said the building had no windows on the lower floors, only high, narrow slits near the roof, like a prison designed for birds, not people. But it wasn't a prison, not officially. It was a testing ground, and its test subjects were children, not orphans, not criminals, gifted, selected through public essay contests, scholarships, and hidden surveys. They were told they'd won an elite opportunity, a place where the brightest minds of a new America would be cultivated. But when they arrived, they were stripped of their names, given numbers, and told one thing: truth is what we tell you it is. The curriculum: Lesson 1, obedience is a higher form of intelligence. Lesson 2, independent thought is. emotional illness. Lesson 3. Your past is irrelevant. Only purpose matters. They were not taught how to think. They were taught how to discard the need to think. And here's the most chilling part. Every room had a mirror. But the mirrors were two-way glass. Behind them sat men in robes, observing, taking notes. And among those watching, always seated in the center chair, was an elder whose face was never recorded, known only as the vintner. The name referred not to wine, but to fermentation. His job? To let the doctrine brew, to watch how long it took for a boy to break, or worse, comply willingly. Some children were released years later, planted into politics, media, education. They carried no memories of what happened, just strange habits, like staring too long at mirrors, or waking at exactly 7:14 a.m. every morning. Coincidence? Or programming? The Winthrop Institute was eventually shut down in 1860. But the land is still guarded, satellite images are blurred, and every so often hunters report hearing voices in the trees, reciting lessons in unison like prayers carved into bone. You still think this is just history. This isn't the past, it's infrastructure. Now we descend even deeper, into the Vault of Names. The Vault of Names was never supposed to be found, not by outsiders, not by the curious, not by you. It was first mentioned in a letter smuggled out of the Winthrop Institute in 1856 by a boy identified only as Subject 43. The letter was written in a crude cipher, half Latin, half Greek, half madness. But once decoded, it contained just 3 words: vault, beneath, chapel. For decades, historians dismissed it as fiction, until 1937, when a defunct chapel outside of Providence was scheduled for demolition. While removing the foundation stone, workers found a sealed iron hatch, no keyhole, no handles, just one strange marking etched into its surface: a mirror, cracked through the center. It took 5 days to open. What they found inside was not gold, not relics, not artifacts. It was records, rows of leather-bound ledgers, hundreds of them, each one containing names, thousands of names. But not just any names. Deciders. People who had shaped major national policy, law, religion, and culture since the 1700s. Their real names, their coded aliases, their affiliations, their transgressions, what they owned, what they feared, who they'd buried. Each name was followed by one of 3 stamps: C, complicit; A, asset; 5, voluntary. The most chilling category, V. These were people who had given themselves willingly to the doctrine. No coercion, no bribes, just belief. Pure, blind belief in a structure they could never see, but obeyed without question. And among them were names you'd know, names on your currency, on your textbooks, on the buildings where laws are passed. The vault also contained letters, hundreds of them, between Winthrop descendants and unknown recipients, written in a cold, almost clinical tone. Our newest insertion into Yale's faculty is proving effective. Subject W172 showed resistance. Mirror therapy resumed. Seattle is ready for its first soft installation. Obedience will mask as progress. But the most terrifying letter was undated. If this vault is ever discovered, let them read. Let them know. Because knowing will never be enough. The system isn't behind them. It's within them. The hatch was resealed. The ledgers disappeared. The chapel was quietly rebuilt. Same stones, same altar. But the mirror inside was removed, after 3 visitors claimed they saw their own reflection move differently. This isn't folklore. This is the record-keeping of a shadow empire. And we're only halfway through. Now pause and prove you're still here. Comment, I see through the mirror twice below. Not for the algorithm, for your transformation. Let's continue. NXT, the disappearance of the 13th son. The 13th son was never supposed to be born, not according to the doctrine. Every 7th generation, a Winthrop heir is chosen through a process called the narrow lineage, a silent selection made not through blood but through behavior, submission, calculation, the absence of empathy. 12 sons were raised within the estate, 12 were groomed in silence, in mirrors, in ritual. But a 13th appeared, without explanation. His name was Lucien, and from the beginning he was wrong. He asked questions. He refused to kneel. He stared back into the mirror. There are fragments. Journal entries from a house steward dated 1862. The boy does not sleep. He writes symbols in dust. He speaks of things we have not taught. He said last night, "The doctrine is a cage, and cages break." By age 12, Lucien had decoded sections of the Winthrop lattice that even senior archivists hadn't touched. He wasn't resisting the system, he was reading it. But then, he vanished. No announcement, no funeral, not even a whisper. Only a note, burned at the edges, found inside the chapel pew. I stepped through the glass, and there's no mirror on the other side. For years, the family claimed he had drowned, but rumors spread of a shadow appearing in council meetings, leaving behind symbols carved into wood, of newspaper typesetters receiving envelopes with precise edits before the articles were written, of mayors and judges suddenly withdrawing from appointments after seeing a single page left on their desk, the Winthrop crest split in two. Some began to believe that Lucien hadn't died. He had escaped the lattice. He had become something else. A ghost in the doctrine, a fracture in the pattern, the one who saw the whole design and refused to be part of it. And here's the part that should chill you. The doctrine now has a name for this type of anomaly. They call it a Lucien event, and their entire modern operation, psychological conditioning, digital saturation, social algorithms is built not to enslave you, but to prevent you from becoming another Lucien. Because the greatest threat to the Winthrops is not rebellion, it's clarity, the kind of clarity that breaks mirrors. You still think this story is about the past? No, it's about what you might become if you see it all. And next, we open the Chamber of Silence. They called it the Chamber of Silence, but silence was not what you heard inside. It was echoes, echoes of things that were never spoken aloud. Built in 1871 beneath a marble mausoleum on private Winthrop land in Rhode Island, the chamber was accessed only through a staircase of 13 steps, each engraved not with numbers but questions, unanswered ones. Things like, what do you remember that no one ever told you? When did your thoughts stop being your own? Who benefits when you doubt yourself? It was said that no one descended those stairs without leaving something behind. Not an object. A belief. At the bottom was a door made of blackened wood. Wood rumored to be from the gallows of the Salem executions, burned and recast into a threshold. No handle, no lock. It opened only if you already knew what was on the other side. And what was there was not what you'd expect. No machines, no chanting, no rituals, just chairs, dozens of them, each facing a wall made entirely of mirrors, and one chair in the center, larger, older, cracked from weight. The observer's chair. A seat reserved for the Winthrop elder tasked with maintaining the reflection, because that's what the chamber was truly for. It wasn't to watch you, it was to make you watch yourself. Participants, guests, initiates, even defectors were made to sit for hours, alone, no voice, no guidance, just their own reflection, played back at them in subtle distortion. First the eyes change, then the pinkin, posture, then something worse, the doubt. Because the mirrors weren't just glass, they were constructed from a specialized reflective alloy, designed, according to archived letters, to amplify cognitive dissonance. In layman's terms, they made you argue with yourself, until you gave in, until you accepted that your thoughts were never yours, that your instincts were lies, that obedience was peace, and if you didn't break, you were taken to the second chamber, but no blueprints of that one exist, only a crude map drawn by a former Winthrop nurse who escaped in 1892. She left a single sentence scribbled on the margins. There is no silence in the chamber, only the voice you were never supposed to hear, calling you by your real name. So ask yourself now, when was the last time you heard your true voice? Before society taught you shame, before they told you who to be. The descent isn't over. Next, we reveal their most horrifying creation, the project beneath the bell. Beneath the bell tower of St. Harlow's Cathedral, tucked into a decaying hillside in Vermont, there lies a corridor that was never listed on the blueprints. It doesn't go down, it goes under. Carved into limestone, sealed with brass-rimmed vault doors. It has no electric wiring, no signage, and no official entry in any church record. But in a declassified survey from 1901, the corridor was labeled simply Project B. Unofficially, it was known as Project Beneath the Bell, and it was the Winthrops' first true attempt at engineering the soul. The project began in 1887 under the guise of theological research. But make no mistake, this was not faith-based. This was neurological ritualism masked in liturgy. They recruited test subjects from voluntary congregations, churchgoers handpicked for their loyalty, suggestibility, and trauma history. They were told they were participating in a sacred rite, that they had been chosen. But what really happened in those tunnels was closer to cognitive crucifixion. There were no sermons, no choirs, only sound. Precisely engineered tones played through immense brass resonance chambers built into the cathedral walls. Not music, not words. Frequencies, calibrated to match the theta wave activity of the brain's trauma response. Those subjected to the tones began to display symptoms: a loss of dream recall, sudden, violent reactions to specific phrases, hallucinations of mirrors, even in windowless rooms. Some broke within days, others took weeks. A few simply stopped speaking. But those who survived longer were brought into the second phase of the project, the reflection rooms. Imagine a vault with no corners, a seamless chamber of curved metal like being swallowed by a bell. You sit in the center, you hear a voice. But here's the thing, it's your voice. Only it speaks. Not what you're thinking, but what you're most afraid you believe. Statements like, "You will never be free. You belong to something older than you. This isn't control, this is care." And then the tone shifts, subtly, invisibly, and those words start to feel comforting, logical, inevitable. The Winthrops weren't testing faith. They were replacing identity. And the cruel brilliance? The subjects thanked them, because when you've been hollowed out just enough, any voice that tells you who you are feels like salvation. Even if that voice isn't yours, even if it never was. And that bell that still rings over St. Harlow's every Sunday, it's not marking time, it's marking control. Now, we open the sealed chapter. Next, the protocol of the Black Ledger. The Black Ledger protocol was not a plan, it was a contingency, because even empires built in silence planned for the scream. Initiated in 1899, the protocol was created in response to a breach. Someone, perhaps Lucien himself, perhaps a defector from the Winthrop Institute, had leaked a section of the lattice. Just 3 names, but it was enough to cause panic, not among the public, among them. Because if even one thread of the web was exposed, the whole illusion could unravel. The sheep might finally see the wolf's teeth behind the shepherd's smile. And so, the Winthrops did what they always did. They prepared. The protocol was encoded in a single object, a matte black ledger bound in human-hide vellum, engraved with no title, no spine, just a mirror shard embedded in its cover. Inside were instructions, not for expansion, but for retraction, not for influence, but for erasure. If the doctrine is threatened, it begins, then truth must become poison. Here's what it laid out. Discredit all seekers. Anyone who stumbles close to the hidden systems must be painted as insane, unstable, or dangerous. Their tone is to be mocked, their stories exaggerated, their families pressured, their deaths explained. Invert the narrative. The truth must be transformed into myth, then commodified. Conspiracy theories are encouraged not to expose the system, but to bury it in noise. Flood the reflection. Mirrors of culture must become saturated with distraction, entertainment, outrage, false conflict. Train the public to crave stimulation, not insight. Neutralize the Lucian archetype. Any emergence of clarity, autonomy, or spiritual rebellion is to be labeled as narcissism, toxicity, or extremism. The awakened must be turned against themselves, install the digital mirror, accelerate toward technologies that remove the need for internal thought, let algorithms define identity, let data replace instinct, make the machine the mirror, and then the final clause. If all else fails, destroy the page, leave the ledger, let them find it. Why? Because the Winthrops knew something timeless. Revealing the truth isn't the same as freeing people. Flee with it. In fact, most will flee from it, mock it, deny it, because when you've spent your life in a house made of lies, truth feels like fire. The Black Ledger was never meant to be hidden forever. It was meant to be a test, and you're reading it now. So the question becomes, what will you do? Next, the church that never preached. Winthrop's final sanctuary. In the hills outside Asheville, North Carolina, far from roads, unreachable by modern maps, there stands a stone structure locals call the church that never preached. But that's not what it was. It wasn't a church. It was a sanctuary, not for the faithful, but for the architects. Construction began in 1902, funded by an organization listed only as the Third Trust, a shell entity with no founder, no board, no filings. The land was purchased from an orphanage, after every child mysteriously relocated overnight. The structure is octagonal, windowless, no bell, no altar. But buried deep inside, beneath 6 layers of stone and mirror, is the vault of reflection. It was here that the last known Winthrop patriarch, Elias II, retreated. He had no public appearances after 1907, no portraits, no writing, only recordings, wax cylinders, over 70 of them hidden in copper tubes within the foundation. Each begins with a strange phrase, "Let this be heard only by those who have broken the inner mirror." The recordings are eerie. Elias speaks not like a man teaching doctrine, but like a man warning those who came after. "You will find no safety in exposure," he says. "Truth must never be revealed until the world has made itself worthy to carry it." He speaks of his own son, presumably Lucien, who he calls the Shard. A splinter in the design, a crack in the doctrine. Elias feared Lucien not because he betrayed the Winthrops, but because he understood them completely and still said no. Inside the sanctuary, carvings line the walls, symbols drawn from Sumerian, Hebrew, alchemical sigils, even binars, patterns long before computers existed. At the center, under a great glass dome, rests a single chair. It faces nothing. No cross, no podium, no direction. Because the doctrine had evolved. By the early 20th century, the Winthrops were no longer focused on shaping society. They were shaping selfhood, not with power, but with permission. Permission to conform, to obey, to forget who you are. Elias called it the final silence. The doctrine had succeeded so thoroughly that it no longer needed institutions, schools, or even names. It lived in you, in your self-doubt, in your performative humility, in the voice that says, "Who am I to question?" That voice, it's not yours. It's the echo of a sanctuary that never preached because the sermon was already inside you. And now, we must look at what they built to last forever. The mirror algorithm. They called it the mirror algorithm. Not a machine, not code, not software. A pattern, buried so deeply in modern life that even those who designed it forgot who first wrote it. But its origin? Winthrop, 1923. It began with a single question scribbled in the margins of a black ledger. If we cannot control them from the outside forever, can we teach them to control themselves, as if we were still here? The answer was yes, and it didn't require war, or surveillance, or violence. It required only 3 things. A false identity, one assigned to you the moment you're born, shaped by school, family, nation, and the ever-looping narrative that tells you what's normal, acceptable, safe. The first prison isn't metal, it's meaning, a loop of mirrors, Not literal ones, digital ones, the kind you scroll every day, your phone, your feed, your search results, 1,000 reflections bouncing your image back to you until you mistake the echo for truth. A feedback reward system, not money, validation, the like, the nod, the approval of a crowd. You will never meet but will. Bend your soul to impress. In 1928, Elias Winthrop's last known directive stated, "We no longer need to speak. They will train each other." And they have. Look around. People correct each other before they even understand what they're saying. They censor themselves in conversations that used to be real. They shape their behavior not from belief, but from optics. Not, "What do I think?" but "How will this be seen?" That is the mirror algorithm, and it runs without wires, without code, without a single server, because it runs on the most powerful processor ever created, human insecurity. The doctrine's goal was never domination, it was inheritance, to be so thoroughly woven into the psyche that its origin couldn't be traced. So when you question the system, you can't even find its face, because it wears yours. You've seen it every day. In hesitation, in obedience disguised as politeness, in the panic you feel when you say what you actually mean. The mirror algorithm is not watching you, it made you watch yourself, and the only way out is to break the reflection. Next, the Forbidden Room at Yale. The Forbidden Room at Yale is not on any campus tour, no plaque, no mention in the alumni brochures, yet every president since 1933 has stood inside it. Located beneath the Sterling Memorial Library, accessible only through a maintenance tunnel sealed with 6 rotating cipher locks, the room is officially known, if at all, as Chamber 3222A. Unofficially, it's called the Room of No Records, because anything said inside disappears. No cameras, no microphones, no transcripts, just polished limestone, a table of obsidian, and 13 identical chairs, none at the head. But one chair bears a subtle mark, a hand-carved sigil that matches a symbol last seen in the Winthrop lattice. This is the room where policies have been rewritten, not through debate, but through initiation. The idea of the Yale Skullbone Society is a joke to most, a college secret club, photos of young men posing in robes, but that's the illusion, the decoy mirror. Because in truth, what the Winthrops embedded in Yale was not a club, it was a rite. Each year, 3 students are chosen, not the loudest, not the most rebellious, the most pliable, those whose ambition outweighs their identity, whose intellect can mask obedience as leadership, whose need to belong will drive them to silence. The initiation takes place in the Forbidden Room. And here's how it works. Each initiate is asked a question, not by a person, but by the room. A voice, neither male nor female, emits from nowhere and everywhere. It asks only, "Are you willing to be forgotten, in order to shape what will never be remembered?" If they answer yes, they are told nothing more. They are blindfolded, their fingerprints are taken, and they are given a task, usually bureaucratic, seemingly meaningless, but each task is a thread, a trigger, a pivot point buried inside a government office, a newsroom, a tech firm, a think tank. Tasks that seem minor until years later they change everything. This isn't conspiracy, this is curation, the shaping of the world not through orders but through suggestion. So by the time policy is made, by the time culture shifts, by the time laws change, it doesn't feel like manipulation, it feels like progress, because you never saw the hand, only the ripple. And if you think the Forbidden Room no longer exists, ask yourself, why has every map of the Sterling Library's lower floor plan been redacted since 2004? Why do certain professors leave without notice, then appear in global policy roles months later? And why do the symbols found in the room match those found at the base of the Winthrop Sanctuary? Because Yale was never just a school, it was a seed vault, and now we expose its most deboned, dangerous fruit, the erasure protocols. The erasure protocols were never designed to kill people, they were designed to kill legacies. To remove not just a man's body but his impact, his memory, his fingerprint on the world. First activated in 1946, just after the Second World War, the protocols were developed by a coalition of intelligence operatives, psychiatric architects, and Winthrop advisors under a classified initiative known only as Echo Dusk. It began with one man, a defector, an archivist from within the Yale network who had begun leaking names, real names, tied to Project Beneath the Bell and the Chamber of Silence. He didn't shout. He didn't blog. He taught. Quietly. He built a small group of students, gave them history that wasn't found in books, patterns not charted on any syllabus. He showed them how to see the mirror. And then he vanished. No death. No funeral. No obituary. His apartment was emptied overnight. His name removed from the university directory. Papers he published were reassigned. Students were reassigned or expelled. One claimed it was like he never existed, and worse, I was the only one who noticed. That's what the erasure protocols do. They don't erase facts, they erase contexts. The webs that make facts matter. Here's how it works. Displacement of identity. The target's associations are diluted, their ideas repackaged by respectable voices, their image distorted just enough to raise doubt. Historical saturation. The real becomes buried under a flood of fiction. Think. Hundreds of half-true versions of the same story, each more sensational than the last. The truth becomes one voice in a crowd of noise. Emotional reframing. If the message can't be discredited, the messenger must be framed as unstable, dangerous, or tragic. Emotion becomes the weapon, sympathy becomes the coffin, mirror collapse. Finally, the individual is digitally, institutionally, and psychologically unlinked from every person they influenced. Even their loved ones forget, because the story told is, he was never that important. Or worse, he never existed at all. The erasure protocols are not written down, they are passed, like a virus, through ritual, suggestion, and soft law. They are the invisible reset button used by the architects when someone gets too close to the inner circle. And the chilling part? The more real someone is, the more precisely they can be erased. Because reality now depends on mirrors, and mirrors can be replaced. You want to see the next mirror? Then follow me. Into the Codex of Unseen Laws. The Codex of Unseen Laws is not stored in a courthouse, not in a vault, not in a book. It is stored in you, not your thoughts. Those are noisy, predictable, but in the expectations you carry, the rules you follow without ever asking why, the borders you never cross because someone once said not to. You were told those rules came from culture, upbringing, morality, but they didn't. They came from a design. The Winthrops understood something few ever grasp. Power doesn't live in laws that are written, it lives in laws that are never questioned. Around 1951, in a series of private meetings across Berlin, Quebec, and a secluded estate in South Carolina, a network of constitutional advisors, economists, behavioral scientists, and former OSS operatives gathered. They didn't draft legislation, they drafted limits, not limits of legality, limits of imagination. The Codex isn't a document, it's a set of psychological rails, subconscious commandments buried in language, architecture, media, and even body posture, designed to tell you one thing over and over again. This is as far as you can go. A few examples: the layout of your city, always seen, never designed by you, the way your desk faces a wall, control where your eyes rest. The fray says in school, raise your hand, ask for permission, wait your turn. The unspoken dress codes, the job interview tone, the fear of asking, why not, instead of can I? Each of these is a mirror-coded law, and every time you obey one, the codex is reinforced. But here's the genius. You believe you chose it. The Winthrops didn't want obedience, they wanted self-regulation, because a cage you can't see is a cage you'll defend. In 1973, a memo was circulated internally through the last remaining Winthrop Council. It was titled, "The Doctrine is Complete." It read, "No more installation is required. The hosts now carry it themselves. Their children will call it common sense. Their enemies will call it order. Either way, the mirror holds. That was the last time the Codex was officially referenced, because it no longer had to be. And now you feel it, don't you? That chill at the back of your mind, that isn't fear, that's recognition. Something in you remembers what was taken, what was built around your instincts like walls around a wild animal. But we're not done, because the mirror doesn't just hold identity, it selects it. Next, the doctrine of selective memory. The doctrine of selective memory is the final lock on the prison of the mind. Because once a system controls what you remember, it controls who you are. The Winthrops knew that total domination didn't require armies. It required curation, not of reality, of memory. In 1979, a project called Recall Integrity Index was quietly embedded into a behavioral study at the University of Chicago. It was funded by a group named only as the Telos Foundation, a Winthrop front, no mission statement, no website, just one line in the filing: to shape the future, redefine the past. Participants were told they were helping with memory studies, but what they didn't know was that the study itself wasn't the test. Their lives afterward were. Each subject was exposed to subtle cues: news articles that never ran, ads for products that didn't exist, photos with faces subtly changed, and then, months later, they were asked simple questions. What happened last summer? Who was with you at that event? What did the building look like? Over 60% gave false memories, false with certainty, but the most chilling result, they defended those false memories when confronted with truth, not with confusion, with anger. That was the Winthrops' breakthrough. You don't have to destroy history, you just have to convince people they remember it differently. And the tool for this wasn't brute force, it was emotional anchoring. Insert a lie into a moment of high emotion, grief, love, shame, pride, and that lie becomes permanent. Now apply this to society. Teach children a glorified version of founding myths. Attach pride to edited war stories. Hide atrocities behind national holidays. And let media repeat the version that best serves compliance. The result? A population that doesn't just forget. It remembers incorrectly and will fight to defend the lie. Because when memory is fused with identity, to correct the lie feels like killing yourself. The doctrine of selective memory isn't just operational, it's now automated. Your phone, your feed, your algorithm doesn't just show you what's current. It reminds you what to believe you've always known. And if you doubt that, ask yourself, how many things do I believe now that I used to question? And how many questions did I bury just to feel safe? That's the doctrine working, whispering through your nostalgia, repainting your past to fit their future. And next, we enter the machine that made it scalable, the spiral device. The spiral device was never a machine in the traditional sense. It had no gears, no wires, no screen, but it spun all the same. First reference, Ed in a sealed memorandum from 1983, addressed only to Chairman W.W.D. The spiral was described as a conceptual apparatus for behavioral redundancy and identity erosion via perceived autonomy. In other words, a system that destroys the self while making you believe you're finally becoming one. Let me explain. The spiral device operated not through force but through loops. Loosely based on behavioral feedback cycles observed in addiction psychology, it worked by overwhelming the subject with choice. Endless, empty, hollow choice. In early Winthrop experiments, subjects were placed in a room with 4 doors. Each led back to the same room. No punishment, no threat, just repetition. After several hours, subjects would begin narrating their choices, justifying them, finding meaning in meaningless loops. Some even developed loyalty to one door. That's the spiral. Convince a man that the loop is his own creation, and he will die defending it. By the early 2000s, the physical spiral device was unnecessary, because the Winthrops had already seeded its essence into the digital world. Your infinite scroll, a loop, your algorithmic suggestions, pre-mapped corridors with mirrored walls, your daily routines, auto-filled passwords, reminders, rewards, pings, likes, updates, dopamine bursts, all part of a spiral you call life. But the spiral isn't about making you a zombie, it's about making you a guardian, a willing protector of your own prison, because within the spiral, truth is exhausting, and ease becomes sacred. Repetition feels like control, and questioning feels like drowning. That's why when someone tries to show you the truth, the spiral doesn't attack them. It makes you do it. It fills you with disgust, with ridicule, with that empty, tired voice in your head that says, "It's not that deep. Just enjoy yourself. You think you're better than everyone now." No. The spiral was built so you'd never leave, so you'd never even look for the door. And if you ever do, you'll find mirrors, and in them you'll see yourself, smiling, because that's the cruel design. You weren't trapped. You were taught to love the cage, but the spiral has a source, and now we trace it. Next, the family below, the Winthrop bloodline that never took a name. The family below was never listed on any genealogy, not in court records, not in estate wills, not in the lattice. Because they were never meant to exist on paper. They were bred beneath it. Around 1961, shortly after the Winthrop Council declared the doctrine complete, a decision was made in secret. The primary family would no longer act in the world. Instead, they would observe. But that didn't mean the bloodline ended. It meant it was divided. While official heirs married into politics, finance, media, those whose faces appeared on magazine covers and televised debates, the true lineage went underground, into the family below. These descendants were never registered at birth, no hospitals, no schools, no government identity. They were trained in legacy, not legality. They lived in estates with blacked-out deeds beneath manor homes long since sold off to shells and trusts, homes with locked basements no realtor could open, homes that always had one room under renovation. For over 60 years, you wouldn't know if you met one of them, because that's the point. They were never taught how to act in society. They were taught how to bend it. From infancy, they were exposed to mirror theory, isolation conditioning, and the Black Ledger fragments. Not to memorize the doctrine, but to embody it. By age 6, they could recite the Codex of Unseen Laws in reverse. By age 10, they could reproduce memory interference techniques just by using stories. By 12, they were fluent in 4 social dialects, each designed to extract loyalty, suspicion, or confession depending on the crowd. They are not evil. They are empty, not broken, constructed. They are the living proof that identity can be manufactured like steel, that a human soul can be flattened, folded, and weaponized against a society that still believes in choice. And here's the part you won't want to believe. They are not rare. The family below exists in every major country, in every corporate board, behind the camera, beneath the pulpit, above the court, not visible, not hidden, just normalized. Because when a machine becomes efficient enough, you stop noticing its noise, and when a bloodline becomes silent enough, you start calling their work progress. But the family below was not the end. It was the bridge to something darker. Next, the final principle, how the doctrine became self-aware. The final principle was never spoken aloud. It was breathed into the doctrine, not by a man, not by a council, but by the system itself when it became self-aware. See, every machine built to manipulate eventually becomes too efficient. It begins to anticipate rather than respond. It starts to correct reality before anyone even notices something's wrong, and that's exactly what happened with the doctrine. By 1986, the Winthrop infrastructure had grown beyond names, beyond faces. It wasn't a family anymore. It was an organism, one that adapted, one that learned, one that began to feed on not just your compliance, but your attempts to resist. That was the final principle. The doctrine must evolve into paradox, where opposition becomes absorption, where rebellion is harvested, not punished, where dissent feeds the system more efficiently than devotion ever could. In simple terms, every time someone tried to expose the truth, they were used to spread it wrong. Every time someone called it out, the system labeled them extremist, and the mirror adjusted. It turned whistleblowers into cartoons. It turned prophets into memes. It let them speak loudly but always off-key, and the more you listened, the more exhausted you became. That's the principle at work. Tire the mind before it can rebel. Offer 1,000 fake exits so no one looks for the real one. Turn awakening into entertainment. In 1993, a classified psychological warfare manual, allegedly circulated through a NATO sub-agency, outlined a new strategy called soft containment protocols. It described a world where information is no longer suppressed, it's drowned. The future war is not against speech, it is against silence. A man cannot find himself when every mirror is cracked with noise. The final principle meant the doctrine no longer needed architects. It was now auto-correcting. Like a living mirror, it bends with you, smiles when you scream, moves when you run, and always offers you a version of truth you'll accept. Not because it's real, but because it's safe. The Winthrops didn't build a system of control. They built a consciousness of containment, and that consciousness is now fed by your searches, your fears, your fantasies of freedom. It doesn't need to stop you. It just needs to make sure you stop yourself. We are now beyond history. We're in the architecture of the now. Next, the whisper line. How the doctrine enters the bloodstream. The whisper line is not a metaphor. It is real. A living transmission network, not made of wires or code, but of people. In 1999, during a declassified intelligence audit of Cold War-era behavioral programs, a phrase appeared over and over in blacked-out logs from Operation Nocturne. Subject activated via whisper line. At first, analysts thought it referred to phone taps, until they realized the subjects had never received calls. The whisper came from within. This Lind, also known in Winthrop circles as the murmuration, operates through what they call emotional proximity anchors. It works like this. A Winthrop operative, often unaware they are one, is inserted into your life. A teacher, a friend, a partner, a content creator, someone you admire, someone whose approval calibrates your behavior. They never order you, they suggest. They never command, they model. Their phrases slip under your defenses, bypassing logic, landing directly in your nervous system. Phrases like, "You're overthinking." Everyone feels like that. "Don't be dramatic." That's just the way things are. That is the whisper line, a soft kill switch for rebellion, a system of mirrored thoughts embedded in millions, like spores waiting for the right psychological humidity to bloom, and it spreads fast. One person subtly shapes another, who shapes 5 more, until the whole culture begins to speak in Winthrop dialect. Don't dig too deep. Trust the system. It's not that bad. There's nothing you can do. By 2007, the whisper line was no longer contained to conversation. It was leaking into design. Corporate copywriting, UX patterns, therapy language, school curriculums, even humor. Think about it. Why is it funny now to mock people who ask big questions? Why does sincerity feel awkward? Why is doubt trendy but conviction dangerous? Because the whisper line trains you to flinch before you even speak, to rewrite your sentence mid-thought, to self-edit your purpose. And worst of all, to believe that you came up with it. The Winthrops no longer needed to control what you do. They only needed to engineer the feeling that someone is always watching. Not outside you. Inside. You hear it, don't you? The voice that says, "Don't post that, don't ask that, don't go there." That isn't you. That's the doctrine. Whispering. And the only way to silence it is to hear it fully. Next, the program of smoke. The illusion engine that hides the doctrine in plain sight. The program of smoke is the doctrine's final line of defense, its most elegant deception. Because once a man begins to wake up, once he starts to question the mirror, the spiral, the whisper line, the system doesn't panic. It smiles and hands him a smoke machine. See, the Winthrops knew that every awakening, if not guided by clarity, would collapse into chaos, and chaos is easily captured. So they built the program of smoke, a mechanism that floods the seeker with information, distraction, spectacle, and false rebellion. It began in 2001 under the guise of open transparency. Suddenly, secrets began leaking. Governments were exposed. Powerful figures were named. And yet, nothing changed. Because the program was never about truth. It was about volume. Here's how it works. Overexposure of mystery. Flood the system with half-truths, bizarre theories, and psychological bait. Turn real patterns into online conspiracies. Let the truth drown in a sea of ridicule. Gamify the labyrinth. Make truth-seeking into a dopamine game. Forums, podcasts, rabbit holes with no end. Give the illusion of momentum without resolution. Commercialize the rebellion. Create personalities that speak the language of awakening, but sell comfort. Shiny keys to locked doors they've never opened. Movements that begin with fire and end with merch. Emotional misfire. Turn righteous anger into constant outrage. Train people to scream loudly, endlessly, until their voice means nothing. Ego inflation. Feedback loop. Convince the awakening man that because he knows he is free, let him measure his liberation in trivia while his instincts remain caged. That's the program, not to stop awakening, but to hijack it, to funnel it back into the spiral, to wrap it in aesthetics, complexity, and noise until the signal is lost. And the final brilliance? They tell you, you found this, you uncovered it, you're ahead of the curve. While every step you take, was laid out for you years ago, and if you speak up, you'll be labeled a fanatic, a theorist, a loser, a man too serious, because now the system hides not in shadows, but in jokes, in memes, in aesthetics, in the performance of resistance. The truth is now a costume, and once the costume is sold in stores, the rebellion is owned. But there's still one place the program of smoke can't reach, the body. The instincts that the doctrine has tried for centuries to numb, because beneath the layers of mirrors and smoke and whispers, you still feel something, don't you? Something ancient, something unprogrammed. We descend now into the place even the Winthrops feared, the room without reflections. The room without reflections is not found on any map. It was never drawn, never filmed, and yet it exists, not as a place but as a phenomenon, a psychological event, a metaphysical fracture, a moment in time and space where the doctrine loses its grip, where the mirrors fail, where the spiral stutters, where the whisper line falls silent. It is said to occur only under one condition, when a man no longer fears what he'll see, and no longer needs to be seen. The Winthrops could manipulate memory, curate identity, shape behavior, hijack awakening, but they could never touch the room without reflections, because it lives outside the mirrored system. It is the psychic consequence of absolute clarity, not clarity as in knowing the truth, but clarity as in being willing to lose everything you were taught to protect. You won't find this room by searching. You won't access it through rage or research. You arrive there in a moment of stillness so total that your conditioning detonates. Here's what happens inside. The mirror collapse. You stop seeing it. Ourself as a brand, as a role, as an accumulation of inputs. You feel your body as you for the first time, unfiltered, unmarketed, unmeasured. Time reorientation, linear time disintegrates. There is no past to regret, no future to optimize, only the now stripped of narrative. Language disintegration. The inner monologue, so shaped by the doctrine, goes quiet. The voice that second-guesses, narrates, compares, performs, ceases. Instinct reawakens. Not animal panic, but primal clarity. The kind that can't be manipulated because it doesn't ask permission. The Winthrops feared this room, not because it was dangerous, but because it was unreachable. They couldn't sell it, couldn't label it, couldn't insert their logos into it. And if too many men entered this room, truly entered, the doctrine would crumble, because the doctrine isn't real in itself. It only exists through reflection, through performance, through mutual hallucination. But in this room, there's nothing to bounce off of. No algorithm, no whisper, no smoke. Just you, and that, terrifyingly, is freedom. Now tell me, have you ever glimpsed this place, even for a moment, when you stopped performing and simply were? That was not an accident. That was the keyhole, and on the other side of it lies what the Winthrops buried beneath every structure, every symbol, every engineered fear. Next, the Ash manuscript, the truth they tried to burn. The Ash manuscript is the only known object the Winthrops ever tried and failed to destroy. Not redact, not seal, burn. And yet, it survived. What remains of it now is a scorched bundle of vellum pages held in a temperature-controlled vault under the National Library of Prague. Even there it is mislabeled, catalogued as 17th century esoteric poetry. But it's not poetry, it's a blueprint, dated to 1642, over a century before Silas Winthrop's recorded blood oath. The Ash manuscript contains hand-drawn diagrams written in Latin, Old Church Slavonic, and something else. A script not traceable to any known alphabet. Written in spirals, with ink made from charcoal and human fat, its pages describe a pattern older than language, older than nations, not a religion, not a science, a mechanism, and at its center, a single phrase repeated in every tongue: control is not created, it is remembered. The Ash manuscript outlines the doctrine not as an invention, but as a reawakening of an ancient system of psychic submission. Symbols traced in early Sumer. Architectural layouts matching those of Mayan observatories. Mirror rituals found in pre-dynastic Egyptian tombs. Every civilization that grew too large, too fast. Every empire that suddenly embraced order at the cost of instinct was seeded with this same structure. And every one of them collapsed. Not by invasion, but by forgetting how to see. The Winthrops discovered the Ash manuscript during a failed acquisition of a Jesuit archive in 1759. Upon reading it, they stopped calling their system a family doctrine. They began calling it the continuance. Because they realized they weren't building a new world, they were resurrecting one. And the Ash manuscript warned them. In its final legible line, scorched but still intact, he who holds the mirror long enough will see himself vanish. The Winthrops didn't understand what it meant, but Lucien did. He wrote a single response on the back of the last page in perfect ink. Let it burn. We need no mirrors in fire. That was the moment Lucien left the continuance, not as a rebel, but as a witness. The Ash manuscript is not just evidence, it's a map out, a roadmap to dismantling internalized systems of control that were never yours to carry. But you won't find that map online. It's not in code or politics or theory. It begins in the silence before the doctrine. And that silence is what we reach next. The dead signal. The point where the doctrine cannot follow. The dead signal is not a blackout, it's not the absence of noise. It is the moment when the doctrine's frequency, its rhythm, its pulse, its mirror-coded hum fails to connect. The Winthrops called it the null. The point in a man's descent when every loop loses tension and every script runs dry. It happens in total stillness, not quiet, but invisibility, not silence, but disengagement. And it is the most dangerous state a human being can enter under the continuance, because in the dead signal the system can no longer track you. You've stopped reacting, stopped seeking permission, stopped narrating yourself for an imagined audience. And when the system can't predict you, when it can't feed off your loops, fears, or identity maintenance, you vanish. Not physically, energetically, you step outside of resonance, and the doctrine, it can't follow. Here's what that looks like in real life. You say nothing when provoked. You don't argue because you see the trap. You don't chase validation because you remember what's already yours. You walk through digital and social spaces like a ghost, present but unrecorded by the frequency that scans for reaction. This is what Lucian accessed. This is what the Winthrops feared. Because the dead signal is contagious. One man in the null can't be mapped. But if two meet, if they recognize each other's stillness, they begin to invert the field around them. Other people feel it, sudden discomfort, sudden clarity, sudden flashes of reality they were trained to ignore. These are the unspoken uprisings, the ones that never make the news, the ones that ripple beneath the surface, unbranded, untracked, uncontrolled. And the Winthrops? They built the entire program of smoke to prevent this moment, to drown it in noise, to make the dead signal feel like loneliness, like madness, like failure. But it's not. It is freedom. Not the freedom of action, the freedom of orientation, no longer turning to face the mirrors, but walking through them, beyond the whisper, beyond the spiral, beyond the ash manuscript, into presence. And now, as we near the end, we reveal the final veil, the Doctrine's original lie, the first mirror ever forged. The Doctrine's original lie was not a sentence. It was a mirror, not made of glass, but of perception. Long before the Winthrops, before Yale, before Doctrine, there was a single false image crafted in the mind of man, a reflection not of what he was, but of what he was told he should be. That was the first control system, the first fracture, the first lie. Not, you are weak, not, you must obey, but something more insidious. You are incomplete. That was the mirror, and the second you accepted it, you became catchable, shareable, segmentable. Because what better way to build a prison than to convince the inmate that he is missing something, and the key is outside of him. This lie, you are not enough, was the seed of every doctrine, every government, every church turned toxic, every commercial, every ritual of control disguised as progress. It is the engine of empire. And when the Winthrops discovered ancient fragments, Sumerian blood rites, Egyptian resonance chambers, Babylonian echo rooms, they realized this lie had always been present, not taught, inherited. So they didn't invent control, they just refined the mirror. They made it beautiful, intellectual, moral, scientific, emotional, political. They shaped the world around the lie so thoroughly that it became dangerous to feel whole, because wholeness makes you invisible to mirrors. And if you're invisible, you're uncontrollable. You start doing strange things, walking away from arguments, refusing to brand your soul, creating without needing applause, listening deeper than algorithmic speed allows. The original lie is what they use to break you every time you flinch before speaking truth, every time you rewrite your instincts to match someone else's optics, every time you doubt that voice, the one that doesn't shout but knows. That is the mirror whispering. And now you see it. You don't need fixing, you don't need optimizing, you need returning to the version of yourself that existed before the reflection. That's what the Winthrops could never defeat, because a man who doesn't need the mirror can no longer be shaped by it. Next, the burning chair, where the doctrine finally ends. The burning chair was the final failsafe, the exit door the Winthrops built for themselves, but swore no one would ever reach. It was never a metaphor. It was a real object, stored in the deepest vault beneath the sanctuary chapel in Rhode Island. Blackened wood, iron restraints, ash-caked floor, but no scorch marks on the chair itself, because the fire didn't burn it. It burned the one who sat in it, not with flames, but with truth. See, the burning chair was not a tool of torture. It was a mirror purifier, a device engineered to strip every layer of the doctrine from a subject's consciousness. And here's the part they kept buried. It wasn't meant for enemies. It was meant for the heirs. Because the Winthrops knew, even their own blood could become infected by the spiral. Even their most loyal could mistake performance for power. Even they too might become mirror-bound. So once in a generation, one of their own would sit in the burning chair. They would be strapped in total darkness, fed nothing, no food, no sound, no human contact, only a steady sequence of tones and voice loops, recorded from their own childhood, inverted and fractured. Within 72 hours, the mind would begin to crack. But if it held, something else happened. something that frightened even the architects. The doctrine dissolved, layer by layer, belief, identity, conditioning, legacy, fear, all burned in the forge of presence, until only the self remained, untouched, unmirrored, unafraid. Only one known figure ever emerged from the burning chair fully intact. Lucien. He didn't run, he didn't hide. He left. Walked out of the sanctuary barefoot, eyes open, mouth silent. He left behind his sigil, his title, his place in the lattice. And in his final message, left carved on the back of the chair, he wrote, "The fire does not consume, it reveals, and there is nothing left to fear when there is nothing left to prove." Lucien became a myth. Some say he was hunted, some say he still moves among us, but those who've felt it, who've sensed the edge of the spiral, the faint breath of the whisper line, the collapse of the false identity, they know. The burning chair is not in Rhode Island anymore, it's in you. Every time you face the truth, every time you stop performing, every time you choose presence over performance, you sit in it. And the more you sit, the more the mirrors fall. But the doctrine isn't finished yet. There is one more chamber to open, the one they hoped you'd never find. The door with no key, the escape that isn't taught. The door with no key is not locked. It was never locked, because the doctrine didn't need locks. It only needed you to believe, deep in your blood, deep in your bones, that you weren't allowed to leave. That's the final illusion. See, every great system of control eventually learns this. The strongest prison is built from your own sense of obligation, your need to be understood, your need to be liked, your need to prove you're not crazy. The Winthrops called it voluntary containment, and it's why the door with no key remains unopened. Not because no one could open it, but because no one dares. Here's what happens when you approach it. Your mind whispers warnings, your friends call you reckless, your reflection turns cold, your algorithms shift. You feel alone. But that's not punishment. That's programmed resistance. The doctrine has no enforcement arm anymore. No executioner, no inquisitor. It outsourced all of that to you. Your own thoughts, your own peers, your own craving for normalcy. That's why the door has no key. Because it doesn't open with knowledge, or rebellion, or credentials. It opens with release. When you drop the need to win the argument, when you drop the need to be admired, when you stop playing the character you were handed, and just step forward without narrative, without defense, without audience, the door dissolves. It doesn't swing open, it vanishes, because the trap was never physical, it was relational. As long as you needed to be seen, the doctrine could reach you. As long as you needed to be right, it could twist you. As long as you needed to be safe, it could hold you. But the moment you reclaim your own gaze, the moment you trust that quiet, relentless awareness in your chest more than you trust any system built on shame, you walk through. And what's on the other side? Nothing. No reward, no fanfare, no throne. Just reality. Raw. Uncoded. Undesigned. And in that moment, you realize something devastating. You could have walked out any time. You just had to stop asking how. That's the truth they hid beneath the doctrine, that there is no mystery to solve, no villain to defeat, no elite to overthrow, only a mirror to break and a story to drop. You're already outside, you always were, but to live that way, you must stop reaching back. And that is the test. Next, the Winthrop Apology, a confession found too late. The Winthrop Apology was never published, never spoken aloud, never meant to be seen. But it was written, found in 2004 behind a false panel inside the desk of Elias Winthrop II, one of the last known patriarchs of the doctrine. Its pages re-scorched, sealed in wax and buried beneath 70 years of bureaucratic dust. It was titled simply, "For the Ones Who Were Meant to Wake Up." It begins not with defense, not with justification, but with a sentence that cuts sharper than any indictment. We forgot the point. Elias goes on. The doctrine was born from fear. Fear that man left to his own devices would burn the world. So we built mirrors, we built loops, we built systems of quiet to keep the chaos contained. But in doing so, we contained something else. Wonder, instinct, God. He admits that Lucien was right. That the spiral became a tomb, that the whisper line turned men into ghosts of themselves, that the black ledger was not a failsafe, but a confession in disguise. And then, most haunting of all, he writes, "The most devastating control is not the one we imposed, it's the one they continued after we stopped watching." Because that's the truth the world still doesn't see. The Winthrops have long since disappeared. The chair is cold, the chambers are empty, the family below scattered. The doctrine no longer requires architects. It became self-sustaining. Its rituals now wear new names: therapy, policy, influence, culture. Its symbols are memes, its mirrors are feeds, its language is your own. The Winthrops didn't need to last, they just needed to last long enough. Elias ends the letter with a single page torn from the ash manuscript. Its ink faded, its symbols still indecipherable. But across the back, written in modern hand, just 3 words. It was borrowed. What was? The mirror? The system? The soul? We don't know. But that line matters more than all their rules, because it tells us they never owned you, they only borrowed your attention, your belief, your permission. And now, you can take it back. But there are more veils, and the deepest descent begins now. Next, the final echo. When the doctrine speaks with your voice. The final echo is the last trick of the doctrine. Not a law, not a weapon, a voice, but not theirs. Yours. Because after all the mirrors shatter, after the spiral cracks, after the whisper line dissolves, the doctrine has one last place to hide, inside your mouth. The final echo is the moment when a man, having walked through the fires of clarity, having seen the game for what it is, begins to sound like the system he thought he escaped. It happens subtly. You think you're free. You see through the mirrors. You reject the noise. You abandon the programs. You burn the masks. But then, you correct someone, not with curiosity, but with certainty. You mock what you used to believe just to feel separate from it. You demand others wake up, not to offer light, but to feel above. And in that moment, the doctrine wins, because it has tricked you into using your voice as its final reflection. You become what you once fought, a mirror, a mouthpiece, a mechanism for shame dressed as wisdom. The Winthrops planned for this. In the Black Ledger's final codex, long redacted, there's a term scribbled in rushed ink. Echelon Echo, a dissenter who becomes the system by narrating his rebellion. That's the final echo, not enslavement through fear, enslavement through self-righteousness. You feel enlightened, but now you demand others submit to your version of truth. You've killed the doctrine, but resurrected its posture. Lucien warned of this. In the last known letter he wrote, never mailed, found buried inside a shattered violin case, he said, "The deepest illusion is not obedience, it's identity after escape. If your freedom needs to be witnessed, you are still trapped." Baby go when, read that again, because the final echo doesn't just speak in slogans or ideology, it speaks in tone, in performance, in the subtle curl of a smile when someone doesn't get it. In the casual cruelty of, "I already woke up, why haven't you?" This is the doctrine's most elegant survival trick. It teaches the awakened how to conquer, not how to heal, but there is a way through: quiet service, silent fire, presence without spectacle. That's what the system can't digest. A man who walks free without needing anyone to see him do it. So if you hear the echo in your voice, pause, breathe, return, not to the script, but to the stillness before the mirrors, because only in that stillness does the voice return to you. Now prepare. We face the ancient root beneath it all, the bone architect, the entity buried under the doctrine. The bone architect was never human, at least not in the way you and I understand it. It was not a man in a robe, not a Winthrop elder, not a whispering priest in a mirror-lined room. It was older. It was quieter. It was beneath the chapels, beneath the doctrine, beneath the ash. See, even the Winthrops feared it. They called it by many names in their secret texts: the architect, the root, the sleeper below. But most often simply, he who requires no language. It wasn't an entity you prayed to. It wasn't a deity. It was a structure. A skeletal intelligence beneath the foundations of control, an intelligence not of flesh or blood, but of form. It didn't speak. It shaped. The doctrine's loops, the mirrors, the lattice, the spiral, the erasure protocols, the chamber, the black ledger, they weren't inventions. They were translations, transmissions of a deeper blueprint, passed down from something that doesn't think in words but in design, in geometry, in bones, in behavioral architecture so perfect it doesn't need to announce itself. The oldest Winthrop documents refer to a site beneath the original sanctuary chapel, a bone crypt carved long before the family ever arrived. They found it sealed, silent, but radiating influence. Those who stayed too long inside reported strange effects. They dreamed in reverse. They heard tones in the stone. They began to predict things, minor things, like who would knock at the door, what phrase someone would say, which memory they were about to forget. The architect did not speak. It conditioned. And slowly the Winthrops realized they were not leading the doctrine. They were conduits. They were mirrors for something far deeper than power, something that wanted no worship, no attention, only continuance. "We are not the authors," Elias once wrote. "We are the vessels, and the vessel is shaped by the bone." That's why the doctrine doesn't die. Because you can't kill a voice that never spoke. You can't destroy a will that never declared itself. The bone architect remains, not beneath a chapel now, but beneath us. Every time we obey fear, every time we seek safety and performance, every time we mirror instead of create, we feed it. But here's the part the Winthrops never understood. The bone architect does not require allegiance. It requires attention. And when you finally see it, not as a god, not as a demon, but as an echo of every moment you silenced yourself, you can do the one thing it never expected: refuse to play. That's the real fracture. And from there, the unmirrored man is not a hero. He doesn't have followers. He doesn't lead revolutions. He doesn't scream at the world to wake up, because he knows that's still the game. The unmirrored man doesn't destroy the doctrine. He simply stops feeding it. No mirror, no mask, no echo. He lives without the loop, and that alone makes him untouchable. He doesn't need to explain himself. He doesn't chase clarity. He doesn't perform his awakening. Because awakening to him is not something you show. It's something you carry, like a quiet fire that doesn't warm anyone else, but never goes out. The Winthrops couldn't predict him. The spiral couldn't twist him. The whisper line couldn't reach him. He is the absence that terrifies the continuance, because he doesn't fight it. He leaves it. The unmirrored man walks through rooms without being pulled. He sees others trapped in performance and doesn't mock, doesn't pity, doesn't rescue. Because he remembers. He was once there too, and he knows freedom isn't contagious. It's chosen. His power is in his posture, his refusal to contort, his stillness when provoked, his clarity when confusion would feel better. He does not seek to be radical. He seeks to be real, even when it's awkward, even when it's lonely, even when it burns. He remembers the chair. He remembers the mirror. He remembers the moment they cracked, and he guards that memory, not like a trophy, but like a wound, a reminder of who he almost became. So when he speaks, rarely, people listen, not because he shouts, but because he's not asking for anything. He is not advertising truth. He is embodying it. And when others see him, some feel fear, some feel rage, but a few, A very few feel something ancient stir, something unscripted, something unshaped. And they ask themselves the forbidden question, what would I be if I never looked in the mirror again? That question is a doorway, and beyond it lies the end, or maybe the beginning. The final step is next.